The latest update from TomTMoore on his prediction says of the pending geological disaster, this is on their checklist, shall we say, of experiences on Earth. But do not limit this just to North America. Only 60 million of the casualties are on the coast and Yellowstone. The rest are in far-flung locations such as Hawaii, Asia, and even Australia. That tsunami will total 200 million.
Unlocking the Soul, a podcast hosted by Rob Simperman and produced by Simplify Films.
Topic 65, Doomsday Prophecies Unlocked. Let me ask you something. What do you fear the most? Some would say death as a knee-jerk response, but you know death is coming, so you've come to terms somewhat with that one. You've rationalized it. You take some comfort in the semblance of immortality available to you, as people have for millennia. Some parts of your life work will survive you. Your creative works, maybe things you made with your hands or digital creations, or perhaps a foundation using your wealth. If you have children you've raised, or simply a collection of lives you influenced over the years, you like to think they'll pass on some part of you for generations to come. But what if it all ends? Everyone you knew, all of your impacts wiped out. It's happened a few times, regionally at least. The Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, whose waves up to 100 feet high killed 228,000 people and displaced over 1.7 million in 14 countries. The China floods of 1931 killed somewhere from 1 to 4 million people. Or how about the AD 79 eruption of Mount Vesuvius that famously destroyed Pompeii, Herculaneum, and 2 neighboring towns? And this list can perhaps include the great flood myths found in numerous ancient folklores, and perhaps even the destruction of Atlantis. Who are the prophets able to predict such a disaster? Every few years, a somewhat reputable mystic predicts an apocalyptic event in a specific and verifiable way, a stake your reputation on it mega prediction that the mystic likely won't come back from if it's inaccurate. And what do all recent doomsday seers have in common? Well, being wrong, of course. So why are we fascinated by them? And more importantly, should you and your family take the next one seriously? History is full of moments where humanity held its breath, convinced the end was nigh. These failed prophecies range from tragic religious miscalculations to bizarre hoaxes and scientific misunderstandings. So here are some of the best. But first, be sure to like, subscribe, and share my podcast channel. Number 1, The Great Disappointment of 1844. In perhaps the most famous American example of a failed prophecy, William Miller, a Baptist preacher, gathered tens of thousands of followers known as Millerites. Based on a complex interpretation of the book of Daniel, 8:14, Miller calculated that Jesus would return to earth to cleanse the sanctuary on October 22, 1844. Many followers sold all their possessions and left their fields unharvested. The lack of anything notable on that date devastated the movement and became known as the Great Disappointment. The fractured movement led to the formation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. 2. The Mayan Apocalypse of 12/21/12. This modern pop culture phenomenon sparked global anxiety and even a blockbuster disaster movie. It was based on the Mesoamerican long count calendar used by the ancient Maya, showing a complete great cycle of 5,125 years, with the last one ending on the winter solstice of 2012. Interpreters claimed that the data marked the end of the world, predicting everything from a collision with a mythical planet called Nerubu to a reversal of Earth's magnetic field. When the date passed peacefully, focus returned to the Mayan scholars who long argued that the Mayan never predicted an apocalypse. To them, the end of the long count was simply the reset, akin to an odometer rolling from 5 nines to 5 zeros. 3. The Halley's Comet Panic of 1910. In a rare instance where science fueled the panic rather than religion, astronomers discovered the Earth would pass through the tail of Halley's Comet. Spectroscopic analysis revealed the tail contained cyanogen, a toxic gas related to cyanide. French astronomer Camille Flammarion predicted the gas would impregnate the atmosphere and snuff out all life on the planet. The media amplified this, causing widespread terror. Opportunists sold anti-comet pills and gas masks to terrified citizens. In reality, the tail was so diffuse that the gas had zero effect on Earth's atmosphere. The comet passed, and the only thing that suffocated was the credibility of the alarmists. 4. Harold Camping's math. In this high-profile modern example of biblical numerology, Harold Camping, a Christian radio broadcaster, used a mathematical formula based on the date of the flood and other biblical numbers to predict the rapture would occur on May 21, 2011. He spent millions on billboards and caravans to advertise the date. When May 21st passed, Camping was flummoxed. He later claims his math was slightly off and that the real end would be October 21st, 2011. When that date also failed, he admitted he had been wrong and retired from public prophecy. 5. The Prophet Hen of Leeds. One of the weirder hoaxes in history comes from Mary Bateman, a con artist in Leeds, England, where I was a couple months ago. In 1806, she claimed her hen had begun laying eggs inscribed with the message, "Christ is coming." Locals flocked to see the miracle, convinced the end times were beginning. But a skeptical doctor caught Bateman writing the message on the eggs with acid and forcibly reinserting them into the poor hen. Mrs. Bateman was later executed for murder, unrelated to the hen. Number 6. Y2K on 1/1/2000. This would have been a technological doomsday rather than a divine one. The fear was that computer systems programmed with 2-digit year codes, 99, would interpret 00 as 1900, causing financial collapse, power grid failures, and planes falling from the sky. While the bug was real, the apocalyptic scenarios were wrong. Governments and corporations spent billions patching systems, and when the clock struck midnight, very few critical errors occurred. I entered the IT consulting field in mid-1999, catching the tail end of this one. I was partying like it was 1999 in New York City that night, as the world kept turning. Though I heard some video stores did try to charge customers for 100 years of late fees. Topic 66. The upcoming TomTMoore Doomsday. That's enough focus on past prophecies. Where's the fun in that? Now let's look at the most imminent doomsday as a case study. TomTMoore is a multifaceted author, mystic, and CEO of a film distribution company. He's best known for championing the spiritual practice of asking higher beings for the most benevolent outcomes, or MBOs, to challenging situations, which his followers constantly describe as effective in their own lives. As the self-described channel, his most controversial and captivating work comes from the books Conversation with Gaia, The Soul of the Earth, and First Contact Conversations with an ET, where he delivers channeled messages on massive Earth movements, future technological and medical advancements, and a timeline for extraterrestrial contact, providing the perfect source material for examining fascinating high-stakes prophecies that claim to come directly from higher, non-human intelligence. His wide-ranging The Gentle Way News weekly letter, with its over 900 archived copies from the past 18 years, covers his channeled answers to questions that are submitted by his readers. I generally find his answers to be consistent with my understanding of spiritualism and interesting. He channels a creator consciousness, a fairy king and queen, angels, an extraterrestrial called Antura, and Gaia, the earth consciousness, among others. Just 3 weeks ago, on November 1st, he described his most relevant prophecy by saying, "Last January, Gaia told me that we are scheduled to have giant earthquakes all along North American west coast, from Tijuana to the Alaskan Aleutian Islands. Plus, these earthquakes would cause Yellowstone to erupt, with a kill radius of 250 miles and an ash cloud that will bury the northern states and southern Canada." In fact, all of his recent newsletter editions include answers to several questions about this stunning prediction, becoming more and more specific over time. He predicts 60 million casualties on the U.S. West Coast and from Yellowstone, and a total of 200 million from the tsunamis hitting islands, Asia, and Australia, all around the Pacific coast. Consider a 100-foot tsunami hitting Hawaii, for example, and large portions of California falling into the sea entirely. An ash cloud from Yellowstone covering as far east as Chicago. He hasn't been pushing these dates out lately, at least, and doubling down, in fact. Impressive in his specificity, he tells us to expect the following timeline in terms of 4 markers, with each predicting the next with a progressively higher level of certainty. Marker 1. November and December of this year, we will see more earthquake activity on the North American West Coast in the 5 to 5.3 range. Note he points to a recent earthquake often, but none are abnormal. Marker number 2, the first 3 months of 2026 start the precursor earthquakes in the 6.0 to 6.5 range, and more smaller quakes. Marker number 3, this would be May and June, when the major earthquakes begin in the magnitude 8 to 9 range. And finally, marker 4 would come 30 to 45 days later when Yellowstone erupts as a supervolcano with a kill radius of 250 miles, along with an ash cloud that'll make the top of the USA and the lower part of Canada unlivable. Now, I've been following his newsletter for the past year and a half, and I witnessed this increasing specificity each week, hence my motivation to make this video so we can watch this timeline unfurl in real time. He presents his information mostly in terms of submitted questions. For example, when asked about whether there'll be a 2027 Academy Awards ceremony, he responds, "This will be quite difficult, or 90% of the actors, directors, and producers and crew members living in the Los Angeles area will lose their lives as they refuse to move in time." He gives 5 recommended actions for us to consider. Number 1, do nothing as you wait to see if the precursor quakes begin in the first 3 months of 2026. 2, put together an earthquake emergency kit, if living along the West Coast. 3, invest in a condominium or house somewhere in the eastern coastal states, while you still can. Note this implies there will not be a complete breakdown of government and property rights, though he says that attempts to control the most impacted states will fall short. 4, invest in a motorhome or traveling trailer where you can live for a couple of years. And number 5, move now while property and jobs are available. Now you see why I was impressed. This is no horoscope language. And before concluding what your level of impact would be, remember that while the most extensive impacts would be to the western US and Pacific Rim, where the tsunami would hit, he says that the 3-foot rise in ocean levels from this event will flood and destroy coastal houses and buildings throughout the entire planet. He addressed with Gaia the question of, will North America and the West Coast ever be livable again? And was told, in a few years, after those areas cease to shake, and there'll be no more tsunamis to wash away the structures built too close to the ocean. For your purpose, let's say 5 years, although some people will try before then. I assume we get another so-called year without a summer, with massive crop failures like those seen in 1816 after the eruption of Mount Tambora. Not pretty at all. If a major geological disaster were coming, wouldn't the government know about it? With all the seismologists on the federal and state payrolls, and possibly even people who secretly converse with aliens who have made contact with our government. I'm open-minded on that. Don't you think our government would have top men who know what's coming? Well, let's pretend for a moment that they do know. What would they do about that? Well, they wouldn't want to cause global panics and chaos. That would cause more damage than it prevents, especially if the chances are under 100% of this all coming true. And if information comes from top secret sources, they couldn't tip their hand completely. But we'd see them start to arrange things, to plan differently. Maybe they would, shift manufacturing of as many products as possible from low-lying Asian countries in the path of the tsunami back to the US industrial hubs, such as by imposing shockingly high tariffs on practically every import from every country all at once, disregarding inflationary impacts despite the political hits for doing so. They would halt shipments of long-lasting produce and grains, such as soybeans, corn, and wheat to China. Instead, they would be filling, even overflowing, storage containers throughout the U.S. before we lose fertile farmland. Blame trade tensions for that one, too. They would deploy National Guard to places like Oregon, Washington, and Southern California, and train them hard on domestic crowd management techniques. Maybe they would even reposition strategic assets like aircraft carriers to be closer to home, get away from the Pacific waves, maybe sending them to the waters off of Venezuela, using the pretense of a new war on drugs. Gold and silver prices, they would probably be shooting to all-time highs too. I'm not saying the government has a method to his madness, since I would never give him more credit than he's earned. But if he did have such information, it would explain a lot to what we've seen over the last several months, better than a lot of other explanations. Are prophecies about future disasters even knowable? You're probably wondering about the multiverse concept and the oft-mentioned branching tree of probable realities and even ascendant beings who seem unable to accurately navigate to see the future. The future is not set. There is no fate but what we make for ourselves. This line, spoken by John Connor in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, is again our source of hope. Dr. Joshua David Stone reminds us that a prophecy is only relevant at the moment in time that it is given because it is a most probable extension of our current path, influenced by free will between now and then. Prophecy only exists to give guidance to a snapshot of humanity. It's like a speedometer or even a compass in a moving car. It says where you will end up if you continue on the current trajectory, while we all know that winding paths are common and expected. Armageddon-type prophecies from thousands of years ago were only given to warn us about our current path. Stone notes that the Virgin Mary's visions of Fatima requested prayers to avert nuclear holocaust with the Soviet Union. One interpretation is that raising that awareness helped change the energy and resulted in the collapse of the Soviet Union and averted disaster. Many predictions include an antichrist, someone who claims to be a savior until corrupting power brings forth the opposite. There are prophecies for a nuclear war between Israel and Syria, open ET contact, and our joining of a confederation of planets, crystal technologies to overcome gravity, and providing unlimited energy, and light and sound inventions leading to etheric vision for us all, an ion generator that clears smog from the air, and more. Now, some of these were foretold to occur 20 or more years ago, and yet here we are. So how should we react to prophesized disasters? Why worry when you can pray, according to Edgar Cayce? I often hear that worrying about a future event gives it energy, focuses your mind and the collective energies on that path in the multiverse, and thus can bring it into our reality. In fact, Seth tells us how purchasing insurance can result in self-fulfilling prophecy in Nature of Personal Reality. He says, "You are paying in advance for illness that you are certain will come your way. You are making all preparations in the present for a future illness. You are betting upon disease and not health. This is the worst kind of natural hypnosis, and yet within your system, insurance is indeed a necessity, because the belief in illness so pervades your mental atmosphere." So what to do? I believe there's a fine line to be walked here. It was described to me most recently by a participant in the Zamit Afterlife Group's weekly gathering, for which I was a featured guest a few weeks ago. We were specifically talking about TomTMoore's prediction, which a group member brought up for discussion. She said that by preparing for a risk, you can actually relieve your mind of worrying about it, therefore reducing the energy you give that possibility. I love that explanation. It's like saying that by having health insurance, you don't need constant anxiety or paranoia about having a health emergency. So what am I doing about this possible U.S. and Pacific geological disaster? Well, I live near the East Coast in the United States, so beyond any immediate risk. But I took a look at my own family's disaster preparedness recently and concluded it was embarrassingly inadequate for even a minor disaster, whether it's a new and worse COVID strain, a terrorist attack on our nation's capital, or even a prolonged outage of one of our utilities. Better preparedness is one of those things I meant to do for a while. I suggest having at least some basic means of food, water, power, and escape if things get really bad. These are responsible steps for every family, not fear-mongering or actualizing a worst case. Even my son had to interview me this month about my family's preparedness plans for his Boy Scouts of America advancement requirement. And if you want to plan for a series of earthquakes and Yellowstone eruption in 2026, please do. In fact, there's a comprehensive planning list right on TomTMoore's website. I've also been keeping tabs on the United States Quakeometer from volcanodiscovery.com and the U.S. Geological Survey site for the past few months. Everything has been in the normal or even below normal range as seen here. Or if you want to go full-blown prepper and move off the grid, there's plenty of vibrant communities and resources to assist you. For example, you can reference homesteading information from this blog and this off-the-grid homesteading neighborhood concept and prototype from Dreamcoat Consulting. This would be required for many years of living after losing the more integrated and scaled communities that we're used to. So how worried should we really be? While it's fascinating and horrifying to imagine our post-apocalyptic thriller movies coming to life, Psychology tells us the answer is not very. Recall that I mentioned Tom was predicting earthquakes since 2008. Apparently, he originally understood them to be imminent back then as well. He writes on his site, quote, "I compiled this book, The Great Quakes of 2008, over a 2-year period after being told in meditation that there would be some enormous movements of the earth in North America in October of 2008. When it didn't happen, I was confused, as on one hand I was happy that it had not occurred, yet on the other, my work seemed to have been done for nothing. I asked in meditation why the earth movements had not happened, and was told that our souls asked for a delay, as we had made enormous progress when we skipped 2 generations in electing the first black president of the United States. There was a great healing which had taken place." So we were saved last time, and on his delayed prediction of the timeline for a free energy machine to be released, he was asked, who's holding up the release? Someone in the government or perhaps a major corporate person such as Elon Musk? He responded, "Good guesses, but this simply has been staff dragging their feet because of their connections to oil and energy companies. Look for this information to be released soon. The genie will soon be released." So that one's interesting because it implies that things like staff dragging their feet are somehow not part of the predicted timeline, yet staff inventing it in the first place was? To understand why we still consider these predictions worthy of interest, understand cognitive dissonance, a psychological theory developed by Leon Festinger in the 1950s while looking at a very similar doomsday prophecy. It explains why believers often become more committed to their group after a prophecy fails. It's fascinating and it's somewhat counterintuitive that when a prophecy fails, true believers often didn't pick up and go home. Instead, they frequently became more radical and eager to recruit new members. At its core, cognitive dissonance is a mental discomfort experienced by a person who holds 2 or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values. To get rid of this uncomfortable tension, the human brain desperately tries to resolve the contradiction. It usually takes the path of least resistance. So rather than admitting I was wrong, which hurts the ego, the brain invents a new reason to make the failure make sense. The most famous study of this behavior was documented in the book When Prophecies Fail. A housewife named Dorothy Martin, referred to as Marion Keech in the book, convinced a group of followers known as the Seekers that a massive flood would destroy the world on December 21st, 1954. She claimed that the true believers would be rescued by a flying saucer sent by aliens known as the Guardians. At midnight, her followers were deeply invested. Many had quit their jobs, sold their homes, had cut ties with their skeptical family members. The researcher, Festinger, and his team infiltrated the group to watch what would happen in real time. Midnight hits. No flying saucer, no flood. 12:05, silence and tension in the room. 4 a.m., the group sat in stunned silence. The dissonance was at its peak. They faced 2 options. Option A, reality. I am a fool. I sold my house for a lie. Extremely painful. Option B, rationalization. There must be another explanation. The resolution was that at 4:45 a.m., Martin received a new message from the aliens. It said that the group's faith had generated so much light that God decided to spare the world. The result? The group was ecstatic. They hadn't been wrong. They had been so right that they saved humanity. The behavioral shift. Before that failure, the group was secretive and shunned the press. After the failure, they immediately called newspapers, went on the radio, and began proselytizing aggressively. Why'd they do this? Psychologically, social proof became their only lifeline. If they could convince others to believe in their new explanation that they had saved the world, it would validate their own internal narrative. As Festinger wrote, the individual must not only unshakably believe, but he must convince others to believe. If more and more people can be persuaded that the system of belief is correct, then clearly it must, after all, be correct. Beyond dissonance, 2 other factors make it hard to leave a doomsday cult after a failure. The sunk cost fallacy. When you have already spent your reputation, your money, and your relationships on a belief, walking away means declaring all of that was a total loss. It's easier to double down, to try to make your investment worth it. And investment of identity. When a belief becomes part of who you are, rather than just what you think, an attack on the belief feels like an attack on yourself. And finally, While you be sure to like, subscribe, and share my podcast channel, I'll get to the tricky part. I need to confront my own cognitive dissonance. I believe, based on evidence I found convincing, that spiritual knowledge is knowable and is often transmitted through channels such as those used by TomTMoore. So part of me wants this knowledge to be true. It would settle the matter with spectacular proof that channeling can predict the future in a verifiable way. The 4 markers discussed would go far beyond lucky guess level. While I'd much rather not witness 200 million deaths, that would also force me to rationalize the failed prophecy, somewhat uncomfortably. I could believe that they were saved, like Tom's previous explanation. Dolores Cannon used that one too to explain the averted Nostradamus timeline. Or I can believe that prophecies are possible. Tom just got some ego leakage into his, or perhaps he was actually communicating with a less reputable ascendant being. But I'm not here to answer all of the universe's questions, just to make sure I ask them. So fare ye well, my friends, and duck and cover when appropriate.